Alright, Chevra, welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Tzadi Hev, Masechta Ayruvin, Daf 95. So we continued today about our discussion about the machlokas between Rav and Shmuel about the Achsadra Babika, the open portico in the open area. Different interpretations about how that machlokas might pan out. Chevra, we begin our new and final perek of Masechta Ayruvin. Isn't that exciting? Wow, it's been a very intense few months. We're getting close. I think it's exciting. Anyways, Chevra, so we're going to start the new perek talking about bringing in tefillin. Machlokas between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Gamliel. Over there, Chevra, let's go weiter. We're going to start on Daf Tzadi Dalet Amud Beis. 4 lines from the bottom. So we're talking about the machlokas between Rav and Shmuel regarding tikra yored v'sosem. Okay, you have achsadra bebika. You have a portico, an open portico on all 4 sides in a open area. So Rav says that we could say tikra yored v'sosem, that we can view it as though all 4 walls, all 4 sides of the ceiling of the roof go all the way down and create 4 walls. According to Shmuel, we don't say that. Okay, now says the Gemara, Be'eser kuliyam lo plige. So if the portico is less than 10 amas by 10 amas, well then everyone agrees that you could say tikra yored v'sosem. There's no problem with that. Ki plige be'yeser me'eser, where they argue it's when the portico is larger than 10 amas by 10 amas. In that case, Rav says that nonetheless we say tikra yored v'sosem, and Shmuel says that we do not. V'ikadamri, to those who say b'yeser kuliyam lo plige, that actually when it's more than 10 amas by 10 amas, well then everyone agrees that you would be unable to say tikra yored v'sosem ki plige be'eser. The machlokas is when it is 10 amas or less. In that case, Rav says that you could say tikra yored v'sosem, and Shmuel says you may not. But the Amr of Yehuda, that which Rav Yehuda said, we saw this, where did we see this, Chevre? And Daf Peivav Amr Aleph. That which Rav Yehuda said, Korah Arba'a Matir Bechurva, that if you have a dilapidated ruin, and there is a Korah, a beam going from one wall to the other, and it is 4 tfachim, so then you could say tikra yored v'sosem and view it as if each of the 2 edges of the beam go down, and it's basically enclosing an area of 4 tefachim wide. So you'd be able to carry under that beam, because we would say tikra yored v'sosem. Rav Nachman Omar, Rav Bar Avua. Rav Nachman says the name of Rav Bar Avua. Korah dalet matir b'moyim, that a beam that is 4 tefachim wide it makes drawing water permitted, right? That if you have a beam 4 tefachim wide, so we would say tikra yored v'sosem on either side of the beam, and you'd be able to draw water under that beam because it would be considered enclosed in Rosh Hashanah. So money. So who would this be like? Would that be supporting? Would that be like Rav? Would it be like maybe Rav and Shmuel? So lahachlishna de amar be'eser lo plige. Well, according to the way that we said that everyone agrees that when the portico is 10 amas or less, well, even Shmuel would say that you could say tikra yored v'sosem, and machlokas is only when it's larger than that. Well, then be'eser v'divrei hakol, and so well then this tikra yored v'sosem by this dilapidated ruin and by the water, Rav and Shmuel are both on board because they argue only when it's larger than 10, but everyone would agree that 10 or less, you would say tikra yored v'sosem. Lachlishna de amar be'eser plige. Now, according to the way of understanding the machlokas between them, that they davka argue when the portico is 10 amas or less, but if it's larger than 10 amas, everyone agrees that you would be unable to say tikra yored v'sosem. Well then, these 2 statements of Rav Yehuda and Rav Nachman, when we're saying tikra yored v'sosem by this beam that's 4 tefachim, that would davka be the opinion of Rav. Lema Abaye v'Rava b'flukta Rav Shmuel kamifrei. Let's say that Abaye and Rava, in their machlokas regarding a sukkah, they would hold like Rav and Shmuel, respectively. Let's see, the Itmar, as it was stated, Sikech al gabe achsadra sheyesh la ptzimin. So let's say you have a portico, and you have schach on top of the portico, Now this portico, there are it's not just 4 beams with nothing in the middle. There are, within 3 tvachim of each other, there are all these like bars, vertical bars within 3 tvachim. So essentially you have a solid wall, halachically. And if you have schach on top, well, everyone agrees that it's going to be a kosher sukkah, because you have 4 walls and you have schach on top. Ein la ptzimin, but what if you don't have these, bars? And then they're basically just 4 open walls. So Abaye Amar Ksher, Rava Amar Psula. Abaye says that it would nonetheless be a kosher sukkah, even though it's got 4 open walls. And Rava says it would be a pasul sukkah. Abaye Amar Kshera, Aminam Pitikra Yored V'Sosem. Abaye says it's a kosher sukkah because we say Pitikra Yored V'Sosem, and therefore we view it as though all the walls are enclosed. For Rava Amar Psula, Lo Aminam Pitikra Yored V'Sosem. Whereas Rava says that it's a pasul sukkah because we don't say Pitikra Yored V'Sosem. So Nu Chevra Lema Abaye Kirav Rava Kishmua. So let's say that Abaye, who says Pitikra Yored V'Sosem, holds like Rab, who says Pitikra Yored V'Sosem, and Rava, who says we don't say Pitikra Yored V'Sosem, holds like Shmuel, who says we don't say Pitikra Yored V'Sosem. So Aliba de Shmuel Kuli Amalo Plige. Okay, so yeah, when it comes to Shmuel's opinion, it's pretty clear where Abaye and Rava fall. Abaye would not hold like Shmuel. Rava would hold like Shmuel. However, Ki Plige Aliba de Rab. However, in terms of our understanding, when we wanted to say that specifically Abaye would hold like Rav, guess what? Rava would argue that he can also, that Rav would agree with him also. What does that mean? Because after all, Abaye said that's a kosher sukkah because of Pitikra Yored V'Sosem, and that is what Rav says. So how could Rava, who says that by sukkah we don't say Pitikra Yored, that by sukkah we do not say Pitikra Yored V'Sosem, how could he possibly be in line with Rav, who does say Pitikra Yored V'Sosem? So Abaye Kirav, okay, so obviously Abaye can hold like Rav, because they both say Pitikra Yored V'Sosem. For Rava, however, Rava, who says that by sukkah we do not say Pitikra Yored V'Sosem, he would nonetheless argue that Rav, who says that by a portico in an open area on Shabbos, Rav says we do say Pitikra Yored V'Sosem. Rava would argue that Rav would not say the same thing when it comes to sukkah, rather that by sukkah he would agree with him, with Rava, that we would not say Pitikra Yored V'Sosem. How come? Arkan lo ka'amar Rav Hasam. The reason why Rav says by Achsadra Bebika, by a portico on Shabbos, that you would say Pitikra Yored V'Sosem, El Dahani Mechitzes LaAchsadra Avide. Well, because these 4 beams that go from vertical beam, right, these 4 horizontal beams that go from vertical beam to vertical beam, that we're extending down to the ground, and saying that those are, tikra, the edges of the roof that extend down to the ground, well, they are made for that purpose. They're made, those beams are there for the achsadra, and therefore we could say, okay, we'll extend them down to the ground. However, Rava argues that you cannot say Pitikra Yored V'Sosem by the sukkah, because these horizontal beams that were extending down to the ground were made for the portico. They weren't made specifically for a sukkah. Therefore, Rava argues that even Rav would agree that we would not say Pitikra Yored V'Sosem by this sukkah. So now the Gemara goes weiter in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yossi Omer im Mutarin, right? So we had the machlokas in the Mishnah between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi, right? We said that if you have a chotzer or a house or a mavoi, right? So if you had a chotzer or a house that it was breached on 2 walls, on 2 sides, or if you had a mavoi that its lechi or korah was removed, so Rabbi Yehuda says, look, you can, it's acceptable for this week, because it happened in the middle of Shabbos. Don't worry about it, but you better fix it by next week. Rabbi Yossi says, look, if it's not acceptable next week, it's not acceptable today either. But the truth is, he doesn't say that exactly. He says if it's acceptable today, it's acceptable forever. If it's not acceptable forever, well then it's not acceptable today. So the Gemara wants to know, Ibailu, Rabbi Yossi le'asor or lahatir? So the Gemara wants to know, is Rabbi Yossi being machmir or is he being mekil? Right? When he says this statement of if it's mutter today, it's mutter for always. If it's not mutter always, it's not mutter today. Like, what's he trying to say? Is he trying to say like, therefore, you can't carry in this area today? Like what's he trying to say? So Amar Rav Sheshes le'asor, v'chein Amar Rabbi Yochanan le'asor. So Rav Sheshes and Rabbi Yochanan both say that he's being machmir. He's saying, look, since you wouldn't be able to use this house or this chutzner or this mavui in the future, well then you also cannot use it today on Shabbos, on this Shabbos. Tanin Amihachi. So we also learn in a brayso like this. Amar Rabbi Yossi, says Rabbi Yossi, Kshem shasurin la'asud lavo, kach asurin la'asud Shabbos. Oh, so We have a brisa which says pretty explicitly, just like in any future Shabbos, you'd be unable to use this house or this chutzner or this mavui, because either it's breached or it's missing a lechi or korah. So therefore also this Shabbos, you would be unable to use it. Itmar, it was stated, Rav Chia bar Ashi Amar Rab Halacha Rab Yossi. So Rav Chia bar Ashi says in the name of Rab that the halacha is like Rab Yossi. Okay, makes sense, right? After all, we learned this is one of the big takeaways. I've been reflecting a little bit recently on Masechta Ayruvin about what are my takeaways from Masechta Ayruvin. What are the things I'm always going to take with me that I know now that I didn't know before we started, and I really like part of what I love about Daf Yomi, and the journey of Daf Yomi is you really get to, or at least for me, I really get an appreciation for the Tanaim and the Amoraim and their personalities and to connect with them. And, one of the big takeaways from Masechta Ayruvin is all the love that we gave to Rabbi Yossi and about how we paskin like Rabbi Yossi Mechavero among all of the students of Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Shimon, right, Rabbi Lazar, all of them. So we dafka paskin like Rabbi Yossi, as we said in a few different places, right? We said Rabbi Yossi Nimuko Imo, right? That he always has good reasons for his opinions. Anyways, so as we see, so Rav is saying, look, the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi, in line with what we had said. I'm probably daf mem vav, mem zayin, something like that. Ushmuel amar halacha Rabbi Yehuda, and Shmuel says that the halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda, okay? Which this is also a discussion that we have seen previously. Let's see. Umiyamar Shmuel hachi, would Shmuel really say that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda? V'atnan, but we learn in a Mishnah. This Mishnah was on Daf Mem Vav Amud Beis, Rabbi Yehuda. But Medvar Mamurim, when do we say that we need to inform somebody about the Erev, i.e. that we have to be ma'ariv on somebody with their das, with their knowledge, with their consent? Be'eruvei tchumen. That is when it comes to Eruvei tchumen. Hava be'eruvei chatzeres, but by Eruvei chatzeres, says Rabbi Yehuda, ma'arivim bein ladas, bein shelo ladas. We can include somebody in an Eruvei chatzeres with his consent or without it. Lefi shezach l'adam shelo b'fanav ve'in chaven el shelo b'fanav. Because we can do somebody a favor, we can help them out, do something that's beneficial for them even without their consent, even not in front of them, such as like an Eruvei chatzeres, right? It's only good. You can only benefit from an Eruvei chatzeres because you can now carry between these places, right? But when it comes to a Eruvei tchumen, well, it's not necessarily meaning. So if the Eruvei tchumen kicks in, well then that means that he's spending Shabbos in a certain place, and while he might gain 2,000 amos in one direction, he loses 2,000 amos from a different direction. So it's not objectively a benefit, and therefore it could actually be to his detriment if he planned to walk in the other direction. So therefore, we can't just include him in an Eruvei tchumen without his consent, but Eruvei chatzeres you can. Okay, but Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, instead of Yehuda in the name of Shmuel, halacha Rabbi Yehuda, that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, v'lo od, and not only that, ela kol makom sheshana Rabbi Yehuda be'eruvin, halacha kemoso, but rather says Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel that any place in Masechta Ayruvin where there's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, we are going to paskin like him. And then we asked, v'amalei Rav Chana Bagdata, the Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel afilu b'mavish nito koraso o lechiav, and then Rav Chana Bagdata says to Rabbi Yehuda, in the name, right, it says to Rabbi Yehuda, does Shmuel even say this by a mavoi, that its lechi and its korah was removed, that we would paskin like Rabbi Yehuda? I.e., in this machlokas between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah, would Shmuel paskin like Rabbi Yehuda? V'amarlei be'eruvin amarti lach v'lo b'mechitzes. Rabbi Yehuda says that Shmuel only paskins like Rabbi Yehuda when it comes to Ayruvin, but this is an Ayruvin, this is hilchos mechitzos. And therefore, we don't necessarily paskin like Rabbi Yehuda by hilchos mechitzos. No. So what do we see? So on the one hand, we're saying over here that Shmuel is saying that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda in this Mishnah. However, this was exactly the question that Rav Chana Bagdata asked Rabbi Yehuda, that when Shmuel says that we always paskin like Rabbi Yehuda when it comes to hilchos Ayruvin, Rav Chana Bagdata asked, would he even apply it to our Mishnah between the Machlokas, between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda? And Rav Yehuda says, no, Shmuel would not paskin like Rabbi Yehuda because this is in Hilchos Eruv and it's Hilchos Mechitzis. So we see that Shmuel does not paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. So why are we saying that Shmuel does paskin like Rabbi Yehuda? So Amar Rav Anan, the Didi Mefarish Limine de Shmuel. So says Rav Anan that it was explained to me the opinion of Shmuel, that it depends where the breach is to, right? If it's breached into Rishus Harabim, so then we would not paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda is the one who says that you can use it for this Shabbos, just make sure it's fixed by next Shabbos. So if the breach is to Rishus Harabim, so then Shmuel would not paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. However, if the breach was to a Carmelis, which is the Rabbanon, so then we would paskin like Rabbi Yehuda and say it's okay for this Shabbos, just make sure you get it fixed by next Shabbos. Says the final Mishnah in the 9th perek of Masechta Ayruvin, Abona Aliyah Al Gabe Shnei Batim. So if you have two houses on two sides of Rishus Harabim, and above the two houses is like a third house in between, and it's above it. So basically there's like a roof now between. So Kilu, you have two houses, one on either side of Rishus Harabim, and they're kind of like walls on either side of Rishus Harabim. Then you have a third house on top of both of those. So it's also kind of like a roof. So now you have like two walls and a roof. Okay. If you have like a bridge that's open on both ends, and as Rashi says, there are walls going down from the sides of the bridge, okay? You can carry under both of them. You can carry under the bridge, you can carry under this house that's like above the two houses b'Shabbos. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, that's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. V'chachamim also, and the chachamim say you'd be unable to carry in these situations, okay? Rabbi Yehuda also said, Rabbi Yehuda says that you're allowed to make an Ayruvin, a Mavri Amefulash, right? A Mavri that's open on both sides to Rishus Harabim. You'd be able to make a Eruv. The Chacham say that you would be unable to make a Mavri, an Eruv and a Mavri Hamefulash. Amar Rabba says, the Gemara that Rabba says, Lo tema hainu tamid Rabbi Yehuda mishum de kasaver beis mechitzas de oraisa. So Rabba says, do not say that the reason why Rabbi Yehuda says that you can carry when you have two houses on either side of Rishus Harabim and another house on top. So Rabbi Yehuda says that you're allowed to carry in that area, right? The question is, how come? So Rabba says, the reason is not because Rabbi Yehuda says that all you need is two walls. Now, of course, we know that Rabbi Yehuda does, in fact, say that all you need is two walls, and we'll get to that. But Rabbi says in this Mishnah, the reason why Rabbi Yehuda says that you're allowed to carry under this house that's on top of the two other houses, the reason is not because he says that you can that two walls creates a Rishus HaYachid. Ela mishum de kasav pitikra yored v'sosem. Rather, it's because Rabbi Yehuda holds pitikra yored v'sosem, that you have two walls, right? Right, the two houses on either side, the houses on either side of Rishus Harabim create two walls, and then the house on top is basically a roof, and we could say pitikra yored v'sosem, and then this area, this Rishus Harabim under the house is completely enclosed. Eisvei Abaye asked the kasha on Rabba. Yasser al-Kain Rabbi Yehuda, that Rabbi Yehuda said, we've seen this Mishnah about 1,000 times, this Brisa about 1,000 times. Mishiyesh lo shnei batim mishnei tzidei Rishus Harabim. If a person has two houses, one on either side of Rishus Harabim, o selechi mikan v'lechi mikan, o kore mikan v'kore mikan, he makes a lechi at the entrance to this walled area, and another lechi at the exit, or a korah at the entrance and a korah at the exit, and then you're allowed to carry as much as you want in the middle. So Amrlo Ema Ayruvin Rishus Harabim b'chach, and the Chacham said you can't make an Ayruvin Rishus Harabim like this. So we saw from there that Rabbi Yehuda holds that Rishus Harabim, that you can create a Rishus HaYachid just with two walls. So we see that that's in fact Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, that all you need is two walls. So therefore, if Rabbi Yehuda says that when you have a house on either side of Rishus Harabim, that already creates a Rishus HaYachid, so and all you need to do is put up a lechi or a korah, so then why don't we say the same thing over here? That when you have the houses on either side of Rishus Harabim, and you have the house on top of them, don't say that it's about pitikra yored v'sosim, say that it's because you have the walls on either side, so therefore it's Rishus HaYachid. So the Gemara answers, Amalei, so Rabbi says to Abaye, he says, Me'ahi in, me'ha lek l'mashma mina. He says, look, I don't disagree with you Right? I agree that Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is that Rishus HaYachid is only 2 walls. You only need 2 walls for Rishus HaYachid. However, says Rabbah, that is unable to be implied from this particular Mishnah. Meaning, from the other Mishnah, that if you have a house on either side of Rishus HaRabim, and all you have to do is put a lechi or a korah, so I agree. That brisa, it's clear that Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is that 2 walls creates a Rishus HaYachid. However, says Rabbah, from this particular Mishnah, with the houses on either side of Rishus HaRabim, with the house on top of it, that would not be a clear proof that Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is that 2 walls create a Rishus HaYachid, because we can say over here that the reason for Rabbi Yehuda saying that is permitted to carry under the house is because Pitikra Yored V'Sosen. Amar Rav Ashi, says Rav Ashi, Masnisa Namideka, you can also infer this specifically from our Mishnah, Midikatani, from the fact that our Mishnah says, Ve'od Amar Rabbi Yehuda, that additionally, Rabbi Yehuda says, Ma'arvin b'mavui amafulash, that you can make an Eruv in a mavui that's open on both sides, v'chachamim osrin, and the chachamim say it's forbidden. Now, Yamard bishlama mishum dikasav pitikra yored v'sosem. So I understand if it's like what Rabbah is explaining, that the ratio of the Mishnah, when you have a house on either side of Rishus HaRabim and a third house on top of it, so the reason why Rabbi Yehuda would say you can carry under this house is because of Pitikra Yored V'Sosim, and not because of the houses, the 2 walls creating Rishus HaYachid. Hanu Dikatani. Well, now I understand the Seifa of the Mishnah when it says Ve'od, and additionally, not only does Rabbi Yehuda say that Pitikra Yored V'Sosim allows you to carry, but Ella Ve'od, right? So and then he says, right, and additionally, even if you have Mavli Amafulash, where you're not going to say Pitikra Yored V'Sosim, still you can create an Eruv because of the 2 walls create a Rishus HaYachid. But if you explain that Rabbi Yehuda says that when you have the houses on either side of Rishus HaRabim with the house on top of it, the reason why you can carry is because there are 2 walls and therefore it's Rishus HaYachid, well then, my Ve'od. Well then what's he saying? And also additionally, you can carry in a mavoi that right that's open. What's the chiddush? We already know from the Reisha that 2 walls create a Rishus HaYachid. So what's the Va'od? What's the additional thing that Rabbi Yehuda is teaching us from the mavoi? We already know that 2 walls create a Rishus HaYachid. So Shema Mina. So we see that it must be that what Rabbi Yehuda is saying in the Reisha is that Pitikra Yored V'Sosim, and he's saying, and additionally, even if there isn't a roof, we could still say that you can create an Eruv in a mavoi because of 2 walls already make a Rishus HaYachid midoraisa. Hadron Allah kol gagos. We will come back to you, all the roofs. Chevre, moving on to the 10th and final chapter of Masechta Ayruvin. Hamotze tefillin, if somebody finds tefillin outside of a city, machnisan zug zug, so he can bring them in one at a time. Okay? Meaning, if he finds, let's say, a few pairs of tefillin, so he can put on one, bring it into the city, take them off, go back out, put on another pair, like that. Rabbi Gamliel says, look, you'd be allowed to put on 2 at a time. Okay? When do we say this? B'yeshanos. That's only if the tefillin are old, meaning they're clearly used, and you can tell that there's certainly, without any reason, without a doubt, they are certainly tefillin. But if the tefillin were new, i.e., you can't tell for sure that they were tefillin, maybe there's some kind of amulet. You can't know with 100% certainty. So then you'd be unable to take them into the city. Mitzvah tzvatim or krichos, if you found there like a whole bunch of tefillin that were like kind of tied together or bundled together somehow, so then in that case, machshich alein umevion, then he should wait until nightfall and then bring them into the city. Okay, and I believe the Gemara is going to explain why that is, why he can't just put them on. But if it's dangerous for him to wait until after Shabbos, because maybe there's bandits out that can harm him, so then he should just cover them up and then come back for them, the next day when it's less dangerous. Reb Shimon Omer, Nosnan lachavero v'chavero lachavero, says Reb Shimon, what you can do is you can give these tefillin to your friend, and then your friend gives it to the next person until you get to the outer chatzar of the city. So basically, you'd be unable to, I guess it's talking about these bunches of tefillin that you're unable to put them on. And then each person just kind of passes them to the next person until they get to the outer chutzner of the city. And similarly, if a woman gives birth out in the field, outside of the city, and now you want to get this little baby who's born into the city, so you can keep on passing this little guy from person to person until they get inside the city. Rabbi Yehuda Omer says, Rabbi Yehuda knows in Adam chavis lachavero, v'chavero lachavero, afilu chutz l'tchum. So it says Rabbi Yehuda that if you have a barrel, I don't know, maybe of wine or beer or something that's in the city, and you want to take it somewhere outside of the city, so you can give it from one person to the next and create like a chain, afilu chutz l'tchum. Even if you want, and then this way, by making chains, you can even deliver this barrel outside of the tchum. Amru lo ta'alich zo yosem ragle ba'ileh. And they responded to Rabbi Yehuda, they said, no, this barrel cannot go any further than its owners would be able to go themselves. Chever says the Gemara, Zug echad in tveilo. No, so our Mishnah, the Tanakama in our Mishnah, now of course Stam Mishnah is Reb Meir, right? So the Tanakama in our Mishnah, who we want to say is Reb Meir, is saying Machnisan Zug Zug, that you can bring these tefillin in one pair at a time. So Zug echad in tveilo. So we're saying, yeah, you could bring them into the city one pair at a time, but you would be unable to bring them into the city two at a time or three at a time. Right? No, only right, one pair is the limit. One shel yad, one shel rosh at a time. Lema tanan stama d'lo Reb Meir. So let's say that this is an example of a stam mishnah that is not Reb Meir's opinion. How come? Tikra Reb Meir, because if it is Reb Meir's opinion, ha'amar, we learned that in Masechta Shabbos we learned lovesh kol ma sheyachu lilbosh v'otev kol ma sheyachu latov, that if a person's house is on fire, chas v'shalom on Shabbos, and he wants to get clothing out of the house, so he can wear whatever he can wear and wrap himself in whatever he can wrap himself in, i.e., he can put on layer upon layer. So if Rabbi Meir says that when it comes to taking out clothing, you can put on as many layers as you can, well then, presumably he would say the same thing by tefillin. And therefore, since he's saying by tefillin, you can only put on one pair at a time, it must be that this Mishnah is not Reb Meir. The Tanan, as we learn in the Mishnah, Ulasham motzi kol klei tashmisho, that he could take outside of his house. If his house is on fire, he could take out any things that he'll be using that day. V'lovesh kol mashiyachol lilbosh, he can wear anything that he can put on himself. Otev kol mashiyachol latov, and wrap himself in whatever he can wrap himself in. So we see that when it comes to clothing, you can put on as much clothing as you want, as he wants, or as he can. So we should theoretically say the same thing over here. And from the fact that we don't, it must mean that the author of our Mishnah is not Reb Meir. But how do you know that Mishnah in Shabbos is Reb Meir, right? We have two Stam Mishnahs, two unattributed Mishnahs. Of course, in general, we say Stam Mishnah is Reb Meir. But at the end of the day, if we have two Stam Mishnahs that seem to be contradicting themselves, so we want to say that, well, one of them is going to not be Reb Meir. So first we want to say that our Mishnah is not Reb Meir, but maybe the Mishnah in Shabbos is not Reb Meir. So, right, so Reb Meir, how do we know that in Masechta Shabbos it's Reb Meir? Well, the Katani Allah, well, because we learned in a Brisa about that Mishnah, Love shumotzi ufoshet, he could put on clothing, take them outside, take them off, V'love shumotzi uposhet, and then put on more layers of clothing, take them outside and take those layers off, Afilu kol hayom kulo, even all day long if he wants to, Divrei Reb Meir, that's Reb Meir's opinion. So we see clearly that the opinion in Masechta Shabbos about putting on lots of clothing and taking them outside is Reb Meir. So therefore, I would assume that the same thing would apply to tefillin. From the fact that we're saying that the Tanakama in our Mishnah says that you would only be able to take out one pair at a time, it must be that the author of our Mishnah is not Reb Meir. Amar Rava, says Rava, Afilu Temer Reb Meir, you can even say that our Mishnah is also Reb Meir. Okay? Hasam derech mabusho kechol shavi rabbanon, ve'acha derech mabusho kechol shavi rabbanon. Look, the rabbis, i.e. Reb Meir, is saying that you're allowed to take things out, but in the normal way that you would do it during the week. So just like during the week, you could put on as much clothing as you want. At any given time, people are wearing several layers of clothing. So also in terms of saving them from a fire, put on as many layers of clothing as you can. When it comes to tefillin, we're also saying that do it the same thing that you do during the week. During the week, you generally put on one pair of tefillin. Well, then also in terms of saving the tefillin, right? If you find tefillin and you want to bring them into the city, well, do it in the same way that you would do it during the week, which is one pair at a time. And therefore, you could argue that our Mishnah is also the same Reb Meir as the Mishnah in Masechta Shabbos, just it's a different subject matter. Masechta Shabbos, we're talking about putting on clothing, so you could put on as many layers of clothing as you want. Over here, we're talking about putting on tefillin, and generally you only put on one pair of tefillin. So that's why Reb Meir says that you put on one pair of tefillin and bring them inside the city. Rabbi Gamliel says that you could put on two pairs of tefillin at a time. So Micah Savar, the Gemara wants to know, what's the deal with Rabbi Gamliel? How does he come up with this number 2, that you're allowed to put on two pairs of tefillin? No more than 2, but more than 1. What's the deal? If he says that Shabbos is the time for wearing tefillin, that there's a mitzvah to wear tefillin on Shabbos, well then, zug echad in tefillo. Well, if that's the case, then he should be allowed to put on only one pair of tefillin, because once he puts on one pair of tefillin, he has fulfilled the baseline commandment of putting on tefillin, in which case, by the time he puts on the second one, there's no longer any commandment, there's no need to be putting it on, and therefore, he shouldn't be able to put them on to save them, right? So if we say that Shabbos is the time to be putting on tefillin, so then put on your tefillin, and you could bring in your Yotze the mitzvah and put them and bring them into the city. But, once you're Yotze the mitzvah, well then you have no business putting on any more tefillin. Well, so then you should only be able to put on one pair of tefillin. V'kasaver Shabbos lavzman tefillinu, and if Rabbi Gamliel holds that Shabbos is not the time for putting on tefillin, i.e. there's no mitzvah to put on tefillin on Shabbos, well then umishumat salah derech mabusho sharulei rabbanan, and the rabbis said, look, even though there's no mitzvah putting on tefillin on Shabbos, in order to save these tefillin, you would be able to put on the tefillin as a malbush, right, to wear them, and then you could bring them into the city. Well then, afilu tveinami. Well then, let him put on as much as he can. So leolam kasaver Shabbos lavzman tefillinu. Okay, so really, Rabbi Gamliel holds that Shabbos is not the time for tefillin. There's no mitzvah to put on tefillin on Shabbos. Okay, fine. So if that's the case, and the Chachamim are saying that, but you're allowed to save the tefillin on Shabbos, and therefore you could put them on, and therefore you'd be allowed to put on more than one. So v'chisharu rabbanan l'inin atzala derech malbush b'makom tefillin. So when the rabbi said that you're allowed to save the tefillin because it's like a malbush, because it's clothing, well, it has to be b'makom tefillin, kilu, the normal way, the normal place that you'd put your tefillin. And there's only, right, and that is why, so you wouldn't be able to just take the tefillin, wrap it around your waist as a belt. Meaning you have to put on the tefillin. And because you have to put on the tefillin, that's why you'd be allowed to take 2, but no more than 2. Ihachi zug echad in tefillah. Well, if that's the case, it has to be in the proper place that you wear your tefillin, right? So Rabbi Gamliel is saying there's no mitzvah to put on tefillin on Shabbos. However, the Chachamim said that we want you to be able to save the tefillin, so therefore you're allowed to put them on, but you have to put them on in their proper location where you generally put on tefillin, one on your head, one on your arm. Well, if that's the case, well then you should only be able to bring in one pair of tefillin, because after all, there's only enough room for one pair of tefillin. So Amar of Shmuel by Rav Yitzchak, says of Shmuel by Rav Yitzchak, Makom yesh birosho, birosh laniach bo shtei tefillin. So says Rav Shmuel by Rav Yitzchak that actually there's enough room on your head to put 2 pairs of tefillin. And that's why Rabbi Gamliel is saying that you're allowed to bring 2 pairs of tefillin into the city. Hanicha derosh, diyad ma'ikal meimar. Okay, but Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak was only saying that on the head there's enough room for 2 pairs of tefillin. What about your arm? Is there enough room on your arm for 2 pairs of tefillin? So the Gemara answers, Kid Rav Huna. Well, it's like Rav Huna, the Amar Rav Huna, Paimim sha'adam bamin asade, v'chavilasa al-rosho. And it says Rav Huna that sometimes a person is coming in from the field into the city, right, and he's got some kind of package that he's holding, that he's carrying and balancing on his head, and it's not mechubad to have his tefillin on his head and also a package on his head, right? Because assuming that he was wearing tefillin all the time, so if he's taking something in from outside the city, his mistama is wearing his tefillin, and if he's got this package on his head, it's not mechubad to also have his tefillin on his head. So what he does is he removes the tefillin from his head and he'll put it on his arm. So we see that there is actually enough room on your arm for 2 pairs of tefillin. So the Gemara says, Eimar do Amar Rav Huna shelo yinag b'en derech bizayon ra'ui mi Amar. But 1 second, I'll argue that, meaning it's not a good proof to bring from Rav Huna's case. Rav Huna's case is talking about almost you can argue it's like a shas adachak kind of thing. It's like a b'diavad, meaning he had some kind of package on his head. It was not mechubad to have the package on his head with his tefillin sharosh squeezed in over there. So in that case, Rav Huna says, look, take off your tefillin sharosh and put it on your arm. But does that mean that we would recommend that, milichatchila, there's enough room on your arm to wear 2 pairs of tefillin, and therefore on Shabbos, when we're saying how much can he comfortably put on, that he should be able to take into the city, will Mamela say that you could put on 2 pairs? I mean, we learned that on your head there's enough room. I'm still not convinced that on my arm there's enough room. So Ella rather, K'ta Amr of Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak, Makom Yesh Barosh Sheroi Laniach Bo Shtei Tefillin. Well, the Gemara says, look, just like Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak says that there is enough place on your head to put on 2 pairs of tefillin, Hachanami, you're also Makom Yesh Biyad Sheroi Laniach Bo Shtei Tefillin. There's also enough room on your arm that you can practically put 2 pairs of tefillin, and therefore, that's why Rabbi Gamliel says that you're allowed to bring 2 pairs of tefillin into the city, because Shabbos is not the time for tefillin, so therefore it's not like an issue of once you put on 1 pair of tefillin you're yotzei mitzvah. No, there's no mitzvah on Shabbos. It's just a matter of the Chacham want you to be able to save these tefillin so you could put them on and wear them, but you have to be able to wear them, in their proper place. And we're about to explain what the proper place is, right? And there's enough room on your head to put 2 sharoshes in their proper place, and on your arm to put 2 shalyads on their proper place. So Tanadve Menashe, we learn by the Besmedrash of Menashe, Al Yodcha, when it says in the pasuk that you put tefillin on your arm, Zoki Bores, that is your bicep, Beinenecha, when we say that you put tefillin between your eyes, Zokod Kod, that is your skull. Heicha, where on your skull? Amrid Verabyane Makom Shemocho Shotinok Rofes, it's the place where a tinek, no, that's the location, no, a tinok, a baby, where the baby's skull is soft. That would be the location where you put your tefillin. I think it's like kind of right above your forehead kind of thing. So yeah, that's where you put your tefillin, on your bicep. We didn't necessarily say right now if it's your right arm or your left arm. I guess it's a different discussion, but you put it on your bicep and you put it on your head. We're going to stop here because otherwise there isn't really a good stopping point for a little bit. But that was Daf Tzadi Ev, Masechta Ayruvin. Let's do a little review. So the first part of of Daf Tzadi Hey discussed the machlokus between Rav and Shmuel about Achsadra Bebika with Pitika Yored V'Sosem. One way of looking at it was that the machlokus between Rav and Shmuel is specifically when the portico is less than 10 amas by 10 amas, but if it's more than 10 amas by 10 amas, everyone would agree we do not say Pitika Yored V'Sosim. The other way to understand it was that the machlokus is dafka when it's more than 10 amas, but less than that, everyone would agree that you would say Pitika Yored V'Sosim. We started a new perek, the 10th and final perek of Masechta Ayruvin, which discussed the sugya of bringing in tefillin from outside, right? Basically to save tefillin from outside of the city on Shabbos. Reb Meir says that you can bring them in 1 at a time. Rabbi Gamliel says that you can bring them in 2 at a time. And the reason for that is because there's enough room on your head and your arm to comfortably bring in, to properly wear 2 pairs of tefillin. And Shabbos is not the time for putting on tefillin, and therefore you're not being yotzi a mitzvah after you put on the first one, and you could save 2, since you can fit them comfortably on your arm and your head. Chevre, I hope you enjoyed Daf Tzadi Hey. Peace out.